I'm going to start off a little bit early. Well, I got about just over halfway, so I'm just going to carry on. I'm reading Basho's Knapsack notebook, and it's one that comes chronologically, it comes a couple before his great masterpiece, The Narrow Path to the Great North, or The Narrow Path to the Interior. And, oh, there's a dog. There's a dog, son. You know what? Where's the dog? Where is he? I might just let this dude chill. There we go. There we go. Now, back to it. So, this was written a few before his great masterpiece, The Narrow Path to the Interior, or The Narrow Path to the Great North. And I still like it. I think I like it most because of the opening paragraphs, which I read last time, so you'll have to look at the last recording if you want to hear them. But it was mainly about how he speaks about there is something between these so many bones and 9 orifices. I always remember that, and I always have a little count. There is something, call it gauze in the wind. So he has this idea of almost like the will or the spirit, but the will isn't something Nietzschean or Schopenhauerian or whatever. It's kind of the will in Basho, I guess, is something just very faint. It almost isn't there. It's almost imperceptible. And so he goes on about how this sort of will has led him, this very almost imperceptible will has led him to a life as a poet, and has led him to great foolishness. So where he's sought fame and riches and wisdom, he's attained none of it, and all he has is the poetry. And that's the first few paragraphs. He then goes on to speak about how everything is connected in a way, then everything is a flower, and you have to see everything as a flower. So it's almost like an Ars Poetica. Ars Poetica being a poem about poetry, not a poem about arses. Although I'm sure there are many great genres of that as well. So before I start reading, what was I going to address? Oh yeah, just that I could be having a midlife crisis at the moment, and this whole kind of streaming thing could be a midlife crisis, and there's no way you can do this streaming malarkey without looking a bit mad, without seeming a bit off your rocker. And I think maybe actually like not playing video games, but not really playing video games, just literally just writing poems while nobody watches you, not playing a video game. It has got a midlife crisis quality to it. But I just don't think there's any way, even if you're quite successful at this, you're still going to look a bit mad to someone. So I'm not really bothered. That said, on the subject of midlife crisis, yeah, there's my boy. He's had a nice sleep, so he won't have these red flashes like last time. See, no one's budging here, are they? Like this dude, I was talking about how I was just complimenting him on being a hard-working man, or at least John was. This has been many hours ago. Oh, he's growling at me now, the dog. Anyway, talks about like, hard-working man. He's done nothing. He's done the princely sum of sod and all. Okay, as have I, to be fair. Okay, 7 minutes past 8, and I'm going to start reading some Basho. So, I'm going to start off a little bit earlier than when I finished last time, and that was when Basho, on his journey, it's now spring. He started on his journey in winter. He started off at a lord's house, I think. He was somewhere else, and everyone just gave him loads of provisions and paper clothes and stuff like that, so he wouldn't be found wanting. So he's found this guy who's offered to be a helper, and his name is Mangi Kumaru. And Mangi Kumaru, Basho ended up saying, yes, you can be my helper, mainly because Mangi Kumaru had what Basho called a boyish name. So we're like, okay, you can. And so they wrote 2 haiku together, and they both wrote on their little paper hats as well, or their cypress hats, I should say. And so Basho starts off with his poem, with his haiku, which is or hakai maybe, or hoku. Hakai is informal, hoku is formal. Those were the two kinds of haiku that were used in Renga. So he starts with this hakai or hoku. I am not qualified to know which one it is. The Yoshino cherries, I will show you. Cypress hat. And then, so yeah, I mean, the two images there are the cherries and the cypress hat. I don't really know what a cypress hat looks like, but maybe it's a juxtaposition. It's springtime. I mean, cherries, they're more of an autumnal thing. I don't know. No, it's for trees, isn't he? He's talking about the blossoms. So when he says the Yoshino cherries, I will show you. Cypress hat. The cypress hat is, I guess, a symbol of a dead tree, maybe. And the Yoshino cherries, obviously, these are cherry trees, and cherry trees are absolutely beautiful at springtime with their blossom. So I will show you cypress hat. So it's this idea of a juxtaposition with the beginning of life, of springtime, with the spirit of death, I think, which is there in the cypress hat. Could be wrong. That's how I'm reading it. The best way to read a haiku and to write a haiku is to always have those two juxtaposing images. Make sure if you really want it to be thought of as a haiku, and there are non-seasonal haiku schools more in the 20th century in Japanese poetry, but if you really want it to be thought of as a haiku, always have I think it's the kiga or the kigo, the seasonal word. So I'm just like, you can tell I'm very comfortable doing this now because I just blatantly just shove my finger in my eye socket just to get a bit of like dried up muck out of the corner of my eye. All I've done is push it in a bit more as well. I think that's done. Is it on my it's on my finger. I would have showed off my autofocus and put it right up to the camera. So there we go. The Yoshino cherries, I will show you. Cypress hat. And then, Basho was a haiku master. That was his job, really. So or a Renga master. So he would start Renga sessions and he would compose these little 17 syllable poems in order to start off Rengas normally. I've forgotten the name of the opening verse of a Renga. And so he would have little haiku writing sessions with everybody. And so he's doing it here with this crazy guy with the boyish name, Mangi Kumaru. Oh, has matey ridden off? Just thinking about my friends. Got some horses there. He's gone, isn't he? Oh no, he's still there. He's done no work. He's done absolutely no work. So now it's Mangi Kumaru's turn to write his haiku. So there's Basho's, the Yoshino cherries, I will show you. Cypress hat. Mangi Kumaru writes, at Yoshino, I too will show them to you. Cypress hat. Now you could say that he's added to it, but I just found it quite funny. I can imagine Basho going, well done. At my open mic, I read out a poem once about how, I was thinking about this poem earlier, about how I made some fly traps because I had a bit of a fruit fly invasion in my flat. And I made some fly traps with balsamic vinegar, like these little things where you have cling film, and you put it inside a glass, and you put balsamic vinegar or some kind of apple cider vinegar at the bottom of a glass. Not too much, just a bit, enough to drown them, but not don't want it overfilled. And then you kind of push in some cling film, and you make a little hole. And it's like a pitcher plant. And so what happens is the flies, they climb down and they go through the little hole. And then they're trapped in the glass. They don't know how to get back up. So in the end, they get knackered and they just fall into the balsamic vinegar. And I wiped out all these flies with about 2 of these traps just put in different parts of the kitchen. And they were gone within a few days. No more flies. It was amazing. But my pride in exterminating these flies was tempered by the fact that I used balsamic vinegar, which made me a bit middle class. And I made a jokey poem about it, about that tension. And then someone turned up at my open mic a week later and goes, oh, is it all right? I've written a poem kind of following from that. And I went, no, it's fine, whatever. If you're inspired, you can always do an after Niall O'Sullivan poem. That's fine, not after Rusty Niall poem. And he read it. And it was just like the same. It wasn't like word for word the same. But there was nothing like, it's not like the language was dramatically like poetical in a certain way. He just literally repeated everything I said, but in his own words. And I was like, yeah, well done, good job. And anyway, that's how I think Basho felt about Mangi Kumura. Mangi Kumaru. Mangi Kumaru. It's raining again. I love the sounds in this video though. All the paraphernalia of a journey can be such a hindrance. To be fair, like Basho did include it though. He included it. This is translated by David Landis Barnhill, by the way, as well. Okay. It's from his book Basho's Journey, which is a compilation of Basho's travel journals. You should buy it. It's really good. All the paraphernalia of a journey can be such a hindrance, so I discarded most everything. But then, sleeping apparel, paper robe and raincoat, ink, stone brush and paper medicine, lunch basket and so on, wrapping them all up and hoisting them onto my back. It's not really... All right, okay. Legs wobbly and body weak. I felt as if I was being dragged backwards and I barely made any headway at all, feeling nothing but misery. Mena haiku. Travel weary, just as I finally find lodging, wisteria blossoms. Again, this kind of agedness, if there's two images, it's him finding, him feeling old and weak, juxtaposed with these wisteria blossoms, the newness of nature. At Hatsuse, I'm sure I'm pronouncing this really badly. Spring night, someone in retreat, so mysterious, in a corner of a temple. I don't know what to say about that one. In his high clogs, a monk too appears, a shower of blossoms. I went into one about that one last time, so I know I'm near where I left off. I won't go into one again, but just think about those two images. The monk in his clogs, so they must be noisy, and at the same time juxtaposes this idea of a shower of blossoms. Man is still there, not doing any work. He's basically waiting for me to go to the old shed with a bear in it, isn't he? That's exactly what's happening. Okay. Mount Kasuraki. All the more I'd like to see it, with dawn coming to the blossoms, the face of God. That's a lovely... Now, there's an ambiguity there, isn't there? So, he said it's about a mountain. All the more I'd like to see it, with dawn coming to the blossoms. There's an image, just... But he's mentioned a mountain before this poem. But if you didn't know about the mountain, you wouldn't know it was about that. He just says the face of God. And I guess the best way to think about that is whether it is this allusion to maybe awakening in Buddhism. The face of God is... here he perhaps he's mentioned the mountain just to say the face of God is the face of the mountain, perhaps. But it's also the face of God is dawn coming to the blossoms, the combination of things. Being in the moment, seeing the thing that is in front of you with a pure gaze is seeing the face of God. I think that's what can be inferred from that. Okay. Mount Miwa, Tafu Peak and Hosu Pass on the road to Dragon's Gate. Higher than the lark, resting in the sky at the pass. Wonderful. I love the names as well. Like Mount Miwa, Tafu Peak, Hoso Pass and the road to Dragon's Gate. That just sounds like an amazing journey, doesn't it? Whereas, like, if you wrote something in England, you'd be like Scarborough, Bognor Regis, Accrington Stanley, Slough, Scunthorpe. I tell my drinking friends of his blossoms hanging over the waterfall. There's a few interesting images juxtaposed there. I guess the two things which are juxtaposed are the drinking friends and then the blossoms hanging over the waterfall. They're one image, even though blossoms hanging and waterfall themselves, two images that can be compared and juxtaposed too. Okay, and Nijiko, petal after petal, mountain roses flutter down, the sound of the rapids. it sort of plays on the image that was there before, wasn't it? The blossoms hanging over the waterfalls, but now like the petals falling down and the sound of the rapids at the same time, and obviously the juxtaposition between the two, something soundless, a bit like the clogs of the monk as well. Keeps bloody repeating himself, doesn't he, this Basho dude? Furu Falls is about 2 miles deep into the mountains behind Furu Shrine. Nunobiki Falls is found on the upper course of Ikuta River in Sioux Province, while Mino Falls of Yamato Province is on the road to the Kachio Temple. I read that in the same way. Oh, the sun's going down. That looks kind of beautiful, doesn't it, on the game? I read that whole passage. Furu Falls is about 2 miles deep into the mountains behind Furu Shrine. Ninobiki Falls is found on the upper course of Ikuta River on Sioux Province, while Mino Falls of Yamato Province is on the road to the Kachio Temple. Now, I make no sense of any of those because I don't know what the references are. I don't know what the places are. But it did remind me of when someone gives me directions and I just nod at them. And you kind of just you're already discarding information that might actually turn out to be important. Is matey still? I'm very curious. I've got a sheep walking up to me. Is he asleep? On his horse? I have no idea. Okay. Cherry blossoms. Cherry blossom viewing. Admirable it is to walk 10 or 12 miles a day. I like that. Isn't it true that the 10,000 steps thing comes from Japan? I read an article about the 10,000 steps that's on all the fitness trackers, and the number was actually completely arbitrary. Like, it's not that you need 10,000 steps a day. It's more that when the first technology was made to measure these kind of things, 10,000 was just how they could set it. And so the whole "you should do this" came afterwards. Anyway, with the sun darkening on the blossoms, it is lonely, a false cypress. I really should have found out what cypress references there are. I really should have learned what the Japanese... Oh! Hello, Eruptu. Thank you for saying this is cool. I think it's cool. Do you like Basho? Do you like haiku? I have no idea. But anyway, I'm going to carry on, mate, but I'll keep an eye on those comments. Thank you for joining me. Okay. With a fan drinking sake in the shadows, falling cherry blossoms. A fan drinking sake. I love that. So what I might do is I can just thank you, Ruptu. Well, I'm going to keep reading poetry, and I'm going to be writing some poetry as well in a little while. I'll be writing my own monoku, which is like one-line haiku. But right now I'm just reading some Basho because I just think he's way better than I am. And then I'm going to finish it by walking up the hill in this game and getting eaten by a bear, because there's a bear trapped in a shack, and I thought it'd be really cool just to read some Basho, write some haiku, then to face the demise of my on-screen character and end the stream by being eaten by a bear. So anyway, but before that, more Basho. Oh yeah, that's what I wanted to do. This is my midlife crisis at the moment. Japanese whiskey. I can't remember. Tenjaku. It's lovely. It's lovely stuff. Lovely. Back to Basho. Spring rain flowing down the tree. The pure spring water. Okay, that is a pun. I'm trying to get those two images because they're almost the same. Spring rain flowing down the tree. The pure spring water. Now, obviously, spring water is something that comes from a spring, normally. So he's comparing something as like, is Basho drinking water from a tree? Is it coming off a branch and he's just holding his mouth out and just catching it in his mouth and then comparing it to water from a spring because the purity of it? Again, these are all sort of Zen moments. These are all sort of Zen happenings. We stayed in Yoshino for 3 days, absorbed in scenes of dawn and dusk. The daybreak moon, deeply moving, my mind stirred and my heart overflowing. I was captivated by Yoshitsune's poem. I wandered astray from Saigyo's broken branch path, and Taishitsu's Vis Vis stayed with me. I have no idea what these references mean. There are little, there's little reference notes that I could go to, but I don't know. Sometimes I just like having my own little, for want of a better word, virgin experience of a poem before I find out. And I normally will find out what the references are and whether I completely went the wrong way. And if I did go completely the wrong way, if I just went that away, due north of what the poet's intentions were, that is absolutely fine. I have no problem with getting the complete wrong grasp of a poem. Um, and I only hope that when I find out the real meaning of the poem, that it's not a disappointment. Okay. But words would not come, and I could only close my mouth. It was so regrettable. I arrived here with poetic ambitions inflated, only to end up disheartened. That kind of feels like my Twitch streaming career so far. I'm not disheartened. I've got nice Japanese whiskey. I'm fine. Okay, another haiku. Mount Koya. For my father and mother, I yearn so deeply, a pheasant's cry. I'm going to read that one again. Mount Koya. For my father and mother, I yearn so deeply, a pheasant's cry. I wonder if he was mute, and at the time, not mute as in actually not able to talk, but I do wonder if the fact that he kind of introduces it with this, I could only close my mouth, and then he kind of attributes this feeling to being without his mother and father, who I'm guessing are dead by this time, are no longer alive, and how he yearns so deeply. But then that juxtaposition, maybe he couldn't talk, but then he heard the cry of a pheasant, and that cry of a pheasant summed up everything. This was written in the 1600s, so this is, I think, maybe a couple of 100 years before Keats wrote Ode to a Nightingale, in the same way that he sees reflected in nature the feeling that he has. So the romantic poets, the way in which they wrote was that they looked at nature as a mirror for their emotional states, for their subjective inner states. And their poetry was all about finding that tension between the two. And of course, we find this in haiku. While with the romantics, perhaps they weren't a bunch of Zen Buddhists, they weren't ultimately looking for peace or enlightenment. They were looking into perhaps what they felt was a wilder, more savage and more merciless, but more passionate nature, perhaps, to mirror their own emotional, sort of churning, volcanic emotional states. There's always more of a peace that perhaps Basho is looking for when he is sort of looking to nature to mirror aspects of his own inner being. Okay, as blossoms fall, I am ashamed of my top knot, the inner temple. That's really interesting. Of course, I don't know if Basho was samurai class. I don't know enough about Basho, but the top knot probably shows that he was. I could be so wrong here. And maybe he just feels like he is a traitor to his upbringing or something like that when he's in the temple. Waka Bay, departing spring. I finally caught up with it here at Wakanura. That's interesting, departing spring. So maybe we're shifting into summer here now as he arrives at the latest stage in his journey. Okay, long prose section coming up. With my heels hurting like Saigyo's, I recalled his troubled crossing at Tenryu River. So I rented a horse, the story of the outraged holy man in my mind. I gazed upon the skill of the creative in the beauty of mountains. I've got some mountains to look at here. Fields and coast. I followed the traces of pilgrims freed of attachments, and I pursued the truth of the masters of the aesthetic way. I had abandoned my home and needed no conveniences. My hands emptied. I wasn't worried about robbers along the road. Sauntering took the place of a palanquin. A simple meal at night. You know what? What's a palanquin? A covered litter for one passenger consisting of a large box carried on two horizontal poles by 4 or 6 okay, it's like a posh rickshaw, isn't it? When you're in a little little box, and you've got people either side carrying you. So, yeah. My hands empty, I wasn't worried about robbers along the road. Sauntering took the place of the palanquin. A simple meal at night was more satisfying than meat, because meat was a fancy meal back in those days. It wasn't just something you get from the corner shop that's really processed. Anyway, I had no itinerary to inhibit me, and there was no set time for morning departures. I had just two wishes for each day: decent lodgings at night and sandals that fit my feet. That was all I required. My feelings shifted with each moment. My moods were made new each day. When I met someone with the slightest aesthetic sensitivity, my joy knew no bounds. Even someone I had despised and dismissed as antiquated and obstinate. When I conversed with him as a companion along some distant road, or encountered him in hut overrun with vines, it was like finding a jewel among junk, or discovering gold amid mud. To jot down such things and relate them to others is one of the true treasures of a journey. I really like that. I really like the idea of what he sees there when he starts obviously talking about the humility, about not having the finer things in life, but about loving the journey, loving the road, being able to see things more clearly when he has less. But that whole thing about company as well, where people he would normally be annoyed by, when he travels with them, he finds them, I don't know, just much better to travel with. Let me just my game went to sleep for a second. The man is still on his horse. Or is that my horse? That's my horse. Where's this dude? Don't think he's there anymore. I missed him. He went off. I'm sorry. If you weren't watching from the beginning, you won't know the storyline I seem to have with this dude on a horse. Back to it. Okay. So there's some more haiku coming now. Clothes changing day. Removing a one layer, I carry it over my shoulder. Clothes changing day. Again, I guess it would have been another time. I'm trying to think what season he's in there. I don't know if he's heading into summer now, and so the relevance here. Departing Yoshino, I'd love to sell my cotton padded coat. Clothes changing day. This one's written. Guess who wrote this one? So again, it's Mangi. It's Mangi Kumaru, the companion of Basho during his travels. Someone who offered to help him, who Basho said yes to because he had a boyish sounding name. So I didn't realize Mangi Kumaru was still part of it, and now maybe Basho is saying that Mangi Kumaru is someone he enjoys his company, but maybe Mangi Kumaru, bless him, is the person that maybe Basho would have felt a bit annoying in any other context. Okay. So yeah, again, okay, to be fair, there's a couple of poems from earlier on where we had one poem by Basho and one by Mangi Kumaru, and at least this one's a little bit different. Mangi Kumaru, he's branched out a bit. He's not like almost entirely copied Basho's poem by adding a couple of little things, basically saying, yeah, me too, in it. It's slightly different this time. Okay. Worshipping at various temples in Nara on a celebration of the Buddha's birthday, we happened to see a fawn born, a remarkable event given the day. Wow, he just saw a baby deer given birth. Buddha's birthday, on this day is born a little fawn. Again, Buddha nature is everywhere, so this is a message he stresses very much at the beginning of it. So this, a fawn is born on Buddha's birthday. Obviously, there's these ideas about the chain of rebirth. I don't know how much he subscribed to the idea, perhaps. I know that there are different Buddhist ideas of rebirth. I don't know how much of that Basho would have subscribed to, but the idea of a fawn being born on Buddha's birthday would at least be perhaps seen as good karma, maybe. I feel like my character's being spied on through some trees right now. Okay. Priest Ganjin of Shodaiji Temple endured 70 adversities in his attempts to come to Japan from China. He is said to have lost his sight due to the salt wind blown into his eyes. Worshipping at his sacred image. With a young leaf, I could wipe the tears from your eyes. Departing from an old friend at Nara. Deer horns developing their first branch. Our separation. I know I sound like I'm overreacting here, but every now and again I read one of these and it's just, and that image saying goodbye to a friend, and yes, it could have been compared to two branches of a tree growing apart. It could have been compared to a road splitting at a crossroads. But no, it's the point when two deer horns. And why does this work? Why does this kind of? I guess because the image is surprising and unexpected for a start. Maybe he saw a deer. Maybe he saw a young deer when he wrote this poem. Um, but yeah, maybe it's just about growth. This deer's becoming something else, and so they are both becoming something else. You know, the deer's horns grow. It's going to become this mighty stag, perhaps. Okay. At a certain person's house in Osaka, iris blossoms. Conversations about them are one joy of a journey. What are the images? There's iris blossoms and conversations about them. Yeah. Suma. The moon is here, yet there seems an absence. Summer in Suma. Seeing the moon, yet something is lacking. Summer in Suma. Those are both by Basho. What's the difference? Why does he include these two poems? They're so similar. The moon is here, yet there seems an absence. Summer in Suma. Seeing the moon, yet something is lacking. Summer in Suma. I mean, they're saying the same thing, aren't they? Or are they? It makes me think more. Perhaps he's by putting these two poems close together. Basho is saying, "Look closer. You're not paying enough attention. If these two poems look the same, then look closer. And look closer at all of these. Don't just skim over them. The moon is here, yet there seems an absence. Summer in Suma. Seeing the moon, yet something is lacking. Summer in Suma." I guess the difference is it's more about the sight. Oh, my cowboy mate's back. He's really staring at me. He's not happy. So there's something about that it's more about Basho's sight in the second one. Almost like he's leaning into it, but there's still nothing there. The sky of mid-fourth month, was still misty, and the moon of the brief night was exceptionally lonely. The mountains were dark with young leaves, and at dawn, the time the cuckoo sings, light began to fall upon the sea. The high play was reddened with waves of wheat, and white poppies were visible among the eaves of the fishers' huts. The faces of the fishers were seen first. Poppy flowers. So the two images obviously are the faces of these fishermen and then the poppy flowers. I'm pretty sure we're into summer now. I'm guessing an old Japanese fisherman in the Edo period was probably not distinctly flower-like, not distinctly floral. And so there's a strong statement he's making here by saying they are like flowers. Like this guy's face here. Here he is, look. Hello.
Queer won't do you no favors around here.
Oh, that was a bit homophobic.
Is it too much to ask for some room?
He was saying that in a...
What's your problem?
Nothing.
Sorry.
We shouldn't be quarreling anyhow.
All right.
All right, okay. Yeah, okay. So anyway, he was going to shoot me. Okay. Where were we? I know. Some people. To be fair, when he said acting queer, I don't think it's old-fashioned talk. I don't think, obviously that's a more a word that was used as a cuss, and then it was a word that was reclaimed by gay people. Anyway, I know there's a bit of action there just to disrupt the poetry. He's still got his gun out, but I'm going to stay here. I think we'll be all right. Okay, maybe I'll stop sort of crouching. Oh no, see this one. There we go. I'll look away. Back to reading Basho. I should read him some Basho. There he is. He's there. Okay. The area, so that was a fisherman haiku. We're back into the prose. The area is divided into East Suma, West Suma, and coastal Suma. None them appeared to have any special local trade. All right, David Landis Barnhill. I'm not going to cuss you. I'm going to cuss your editor. None them appeared to have any special local trade. I think you missed an of there. I think your copy editor was not on their game. I'm not going to blame the translator for this. Okay. I had heard of salt making here in poems such as Yuki Hiri's gathering seaweed, and I found no activity like that now. The people net for kisugo fish and lay them out to dry, but crows swoop in to snatch them away. Wow. Despising the birds for this, fishermen frighten them with bow and arrows. Not a proper part of fishing, I thought. Oh, that makes me laugh. Brilliant, Basho. Poor guys, these fishermen have these crows trying to steal their fish, and they shoot at the fish with bows and arrows. Brilliant. I wondered if the practice was a lingering effect of being the site of an ancient battle, which would only increase the sense of sin involved. Wow. Deeply drawn to the past, I decided to scale Tetsukai Peak. My young guide grumbled and made any number of excuses not to go, but I coaxed him by saying, "We'll get something to eat at the tea house at the foot of the mountain," and he grudgingly relented. He was about 4 years younger than that 16-year-old village boy, but he led our ascent of the many hundreds of feet as we crawled our way up the precipitous twisting route over the rocks. He was 12! That's a really roundabout way of saying you marched. A 12-year-old didn't want to go marching with your stuff up a mountain, but I'll buy you tea from the place at the bottom of the mountain first. Okay. But he led our ascent on the many hundreds of feet as we crawled our way up the precipitous twisting route over the rocks, many times nearly skipping, grabbing hold of azaleas or ground bamboo to keep from falling, out of breath and soaked with sweat. Then we entered the gateway of the clouds. Lovely line, thanks to the anxious efforts of our guide. Is it crying from an arrow from the fishes of Suma? Cuckoo. Oh. I'm glad we had that passage of prose, because imagine if what would we have made of that haiku if we hadn't read that little prose interlude passage beforehand? Is it crying from an arrow from the fishes of Suma? Cuckoo. And then the next poem begins with the last word of the previous one. Cuckoo. Cuckoo. Off where it disappears. A single island. Temple of Suma. Hearing the unblown flute in the deep shade of trees. The unblown flute in the deep shade of trees. I don't know if a flute is a reference to the temple. I don't know if a flute might have been expected to be heard in the temples, but hearing an unblown flute, the sound, very much like the sound of one hand clapping there, isn't it? You're hearing the sound of the unblown flute in the deep shade of trees. Octopus traps, fleeting dreams under summer's moon. Okay, that is wonderful. I don't know about you guys. I haven't watched My Octopus Teacher yet, but I know enough about how intelligent octopi are that I don't eat birds and I don't eat mammals, but I wouldn't eat octopus either because of how smart they are, just because they are magical creatures. Octopus traps, fleeting dreams under summer's moon. I'm guessing octopus traps are under the water, but there's fleeting dreams as well under summer's moon. A dream is like an octopus trap. A fleeting dream. Isn't it said that here in Suma it is autumn? Certainly the essence of this bay is found in fall. The sorrow and loneliness is beyond words. But I had thought that if it were autumn, I'd be able to convey some tiny tip of my feelings, which just shows how oblivious I am to my mind's lack of skill. And that's Basho's humility creeping up again. As if reaching out a hand, the island of the Waji splits the bay of Suma and the sea of Akashi to the right and left. Dufu's vista of Wu and Shu to the east and south may have been like this, but a truly learned man would have been able to think of many such resemblances. Dufu is another name for Tufu or Dufu, and he was a friend of Li Bai, and he is often thought of as a great Chinese poet of the Tang dynasty. Dufu. Dufu went to war. He was more of a soldier. Li Bai was sort of an itinerant, drunken, but very famous poet, and Dufu was a warrior poet. On the other side of the mountains is a place called Tai no Hata, said to be the birthplace of Matsukaze and Murasame. A road runs along the ridge towards Tamba. The forbidding names of Hell's Window and Downhill Charge remained in the old times. And looking down from Bell Hanging Pine, I could see the imperial castle at Ichinotani. The confusion of that day and the tumult of the times rose in my mind, and images gathered before my eyes. The grandmother of the young emperor, clutching him in her arms, his legs tangled in his mother's dress, all of them falling into the imperial barge. Court ladies of various ranks carrying their personal articles, throwing into the boat lutes and sivens wrapped in cushions and beddings, imperial food spilling into the water, becoming bait for fish, vanity boxes overturning and looking like a fisherman's discarded kelp. The sorrow of 1,000 years lingers on this beach. In the sound of the insensate white waves is deep grief. That's the end of Knapsack Notebook. I'd like to read that a little bit of that last paragraph again before I move on to writing some haiku or some monoku of my own. But I've also got something else to read by Basho. Okay. The confusion of that day and the tumult of the times rose in my mind, and images gathered before my eyes. The grandmother of the young emperor clutching him in her arms. I don't know what the reference is, but we can imagine again some craziness happening here within a dynastic imperial setting. His legs tangled in his mother's dress, all of them falling into the imperial barge. Court ladies of various ranks carrying their personal articles, throwing into the boat lutes and sivens wrapped in cushions and beddings. Imperial food spilling into the water, becoming bait for fish. Vanity boxes overturning and looking like a fisherman's discarded kelp. The sorrow of 1,000 years lingers on this beach. In the sound of the insensate white waves is deep grief. Okay. I don't know if this is like a child emperor that has died, maybe, and it's a funeral barge. I don't know. I don't think Chinese or Japanese emperors had funeral barges, I'm guessing. I'm about to start watching Vikings after I've done this stream. Okay. And I'm thinking of funeral barges.